Hello everyone, welcome to part 2 of our IFR tutorial. So today we're going to go ahead and fly this nice little Cessna 172 all the way back up to Hartford, Connecticut from Groton, New London. The one thing that I was mentioning before is we're going to be using the IFR rules this time as opposed to the VFR or even the pilotage technique. We're definitely going to have a couple different things that are going to mix things up, make things interesting for us, but I'll kind of point those out sort of as we're doing our little journey today. The first thing we're going to be doing that's going to be a little different than probably what you're used to is we're going to be using a little bit more air traffic control. In the real world, there's no such thing as IFR flight rules without having direct control from some sort of controlling agency. This is a major difference from everything else we've flown so far because of the fact that we need to make sure we're on top of that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get clearance for the IFR flight. Now, in the real world, getting IFR clearance is one of those things that you can do pretty much in advance. Usually what you do, and at least that's what we used to do, is we'd get our cell phones out and we'd actually call it in directly. In the flight simulator, we actually can request it from anybody who does an approach or departure clearance. So I'm going to go ahead and flip on our battery here. This thing's going to get very grumpy at us very, very quickly. And we're just going to go ahead and flip over to the approach. This is going to be clearance, which again, this would be the equivalent of Groton departure. Go ahead and call them up, and we request IFR clearance. So you're going to want to go ahead and take out your pen and your pencil and get ready to write on your leg really fast.
Ready to copy.
Click, click. Here we go.
Red 64 is cleared to Brainerd Airport as filed. Takeoff runway tree climb and maintain 4,000 feet. Departure frequency is 125.75 squawk 612 tree.
So what you would do now is after they give you a huge list of good stuff, I'll stop that because I know how irritating that could be. After they give you a huge list of all that good useful things that you need to know for this particular flight, we then go ahead and write it all down on our leg, then we call it back. We get our transponder all set, we come in here, we do our code 6123, 123.
And maintain 4,000 feet. Departure on 125.75, squawk 6123.
Red 64 reads correct.
Stop that.
Contact
6.
ground on 121
I've done that about a million times before. 1, 2, 3. Press back. Okay, so that's all you would do. So now that we've requested our IFR clearance, we've been put into the computer so that we can go ahead and get ready for our actual flight. Now, usually you can do this up to a half an hour before. Like a lot of times what they'll say is, clearance void 30 minutes from now, in which case now you have 30 minutes. Keep in mind your IFR flight plan was probably filed even potentially a day or two completely in advance of everything that's going on. So right now, we're going to go ahead and get everything else ready. We're going to go ahead and contact ATIS. We want to double check to hear exactly what the weather is.
Oscar 1800 Zulu. Wind tree 45 at 25. Visibility 10. Sky condition, few clouds at 1,100 feet, few clouds at 4,100 feet, few clouds at 12,000 feet. Temperature 1 tree. Dew point 10. Altimeter 29.90. Visual runway tree in use. Landing and departing runway tree. VFR aircraft say direction of flight. All aircraft read back hold short instructions. Advise controller on initial contact you have, Oscar.
Okay, that's the incredible important thing that we need to know. You can't exactly call your tower until you've gotten information for what your particular word is. In this case, the magic word today is Oscar. So when we call it in, we can say that request clearance IFR with Oscar to let them know that we've already checked the weather. So now we can go ahead and simply request taxi IFR. But for me, I'd rather get this thing on nice and started. Go ahead and turn on our beacon light real quickly. Everything else is good to go. We're just going to sit here and go ahead and crank the sucker. Make sure the fuel's turned on. Clear prop. And that's it. Now we're running. Ooh, easy. Easy. All right, flip on our avionics. Everything's kind of boot up for a second here. And now we can go ahead and request our taxi IFR that's going to take us to our destination. One trick that I really, really, really like to use with the Garmin G1000 is you can zoom in to like crazily, really, really, really good levels. So if I'm trying to find this particular runway, you can literally see what this specific runway that we need to use is. It's like unlike anything else in so many other technologies. We're going to request taxi IFR.
Ground red 64.
While that's going, we're going to go ahead and get our codes set up. Remember, we're going to be using VOR at 110.85. That was the frequency we got from earlier.
Taxiway Bravo, cross runway 23 Charlie.
Good. Okay. So our initial heading from that 110.85. Remember, this is going to be the Victor 58, which is going to put us on roughly a 289 course. We're going to go ahead and acknowledge the taxi course. We're going to set this to 289.
Short runway.
289 is going to get us going pretty much the direction we need to go here. There we go. And that should be just about everything that we're going to need to do. It's given us instructions to hold short tree via Bravo, runway 23, center, red 64. Okay, so that's it. We've been given permission to go ahead and get this thing rolling. We're going to go ahead and do that now. Again, this thing's pretty easy to control. In the real world, we'd have to ask that gentleman right there to go ahead and turn us around. Too bad. There's the follow me car. He's probably coming to serve me a citation here. Sorry. So let's see. We're just going to go ahead and proceed. Whoa! Sorry about that. Sorry. Okay, Bravo is basically straight ahead. We're just going to keep kind of migrating in that general direction. There we go. There we are. Generally, you want to stay out of vehicle lanes, but again, sometimes you have kind of unique circumstances that preclude you from doing that safely. All right, we're going to go ahead and swing around into this way. This is going to get us onto Bravo. Generally, if it's nighttime, you want to go ahead and make sure that you have any of your critical lights on. We're going to be taking a midfield takeoff today, so I'm actually going to proceed straight down this road this way. You can see we have an extremely strong wind. We've had some pretty nasty weather here the last few days, so this is going to make things much more fun than they need to be. As a matter of fact, if we wanted to, we could actually flip this on. Okay, that's already set. PFD, we'll set the wind page on here. Technically, you can't read the wind when you're not moving. That's accurate. Give us a little bit more power, and we're going to go ahead and slow down, come to a complete stop before crossing this runway. Now remember, just because we got clearance for this particular flight does not mean we're actually in their system yet. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to call up the tower. I'm going to request clearance IFR.
Tower Red 64 at runway tree ready for takeoff IFR to Brainerd. Red 64 cleared for takeoff runway tree.
Clear 33, red 64. That's all you got to do. Now we're just going to get rolling.
Tree red 64.
Get ourselves all nice and lined up here. A little bit more power. Go ahead and check to make sure I'm not cutting anybody off. Although if they gave me clearance, it should be good. Look at that windsock. Oh boy, this is going to be a fun flight. All right, let's do it. And off we go on an IFR flight. Everything's looking pretty good so far. We're just sort of ripping along the runway here. 55 knots is our rotate speed. We're going to go ahead and lift ourselves up airborne. We're immediately going to have to start compensating for that extremely strong crosswind. I'm going to go ahead and get us going just a little bit safer here. Yeah, looks pretty good. Bring up your flaps if you did use them. I did not in this particular case. All right, looking pretty good. Switch over the CDI to the GPS for just a moment. Pretty solid. I'm actually going to come to my left just a teeny tiny bit. Nice. Flip on the automatic pilot. Go ahead and flip on your flight director if you've not done so. I'm going to go ahead and make sure I'm on navigation mode. And this is a pretty good vertical speed. I feel like I don't need to change this. Usually I do a flight level change because it's safer. Go up. Do 75 knots. It's a pretty safe climb speed. Remember, we're going up to 4,000 feet here. All right, and that's all I had to do. I just want to confirm that's supposed to be tree 24. I'm actually going to do a heading hold for just a moment. Notice we just got called to do Providence departure. Now we're getting handed off to the TRACON is what it's called. So now we're going to go ahead and call them up. Providence departure, red 64 is at 800 for 4,000.
Providence departure red 64 is at 800 feet, climbing 4,000 feet.
Right.
Red 64 Providence departure, continue to Salem as planned. Altimeter 29.901.
That's all you have to do. Once you're in their system, they now recognize you, and you're simply going to be operating aircraft in that general direction. Now, normally, of course, at this point, we like to go ahead and double check to make sure everything's been set up correctly as far as our flight goes. Again, we're going to be interested in distances. We're not going to be interested necessarily in times, as we were with Dead Reckoning. So one thing I will do is on my PFD here, I'll go ahead and flip on my bearing. That's my distance from Groton VOR. You can see that it's a little bit off to my side there. We're getting a pretty substantial crosswind. Now, I'm using the GPS right now as my navigation source. If I wanted to actually use this, again, I could just go ahead and flip my CDI mode. Let's go ahead and do a heading hold real quick before I do that, because that can get really nasty if you're not careful. And then what I could actually do is, let's go back here, set my CDI to VOR1, and then I could actually set it to that course of tree 25 that I was at before. Now I can actually use this aircraft to follow the VOR as opposed to following the GPS. I find, at least in this version of Flight Simulator, that the GPS is not nearly as reliable. I'm sorry, the other way around. The VOR is not nearly as reliable as far as precision as the GPS, which is actually also true in the real world as well. There's no big changes there. So basically, we're now on our IFR flight plan. We've been put into the system. We're cruising. We're about to get some really nasty weather in a few moments, but that's kind of what we were expecting today. And believe it or not, in the real world, we really wouldn't be going that crazy far directly along here, because we would have been called up by air traffic control and basically told that we need to go ahead and start preparing for our approach, which is exactly what we're going to be doing in a moment. Now, thinking about my calculations, we should be hitting our top of climb just about at the edge of this lake here. Again, that's just a reference back to when we did this as Dead Reckoning. Notice our aircraft is doing a constant speed climb, which is nice and safe. Notice we're using the VOR as our primary source. And notice we have this little gauge right here, which is going to tell us how far away from that particular VOR station we're going to travel. In this case, remember that we're going to be traveling about 19 nautical miles or so before we're going to be taking that left turn. So we have plenty of time to start thinking about our approach. I'm going to go ahead and lean out my mixture a teeny tiny bit here. One of the great things about Cessna 172s is you basically fly at full throttle and nobody notices. I think that's one of the greatest little quirks there. While we're getting that all sorted out, though, I'm going to go ahead and take a look at our approach real fast. I just want to make sure everything makes perfect sense when I'm kind of getting ready on our climb. Just looking real fast here. Looks like we're going to be going from Thumb. We need to be at 2,500 feet when we get to Thumb. When we get to WEGOT, let's see, WEGOT is also 2,500 at or above. Then by the time we get to Lomas, it's going to be 2,200. By the time we get to Dan's, we need to be 680 feet or below. Our absolute minimum today is going to be, let's see here, 460 feet. That's going to be this point right here. Once we hit that spot, if we don't see the end of the runway, which I'm pretty sure we will, we need to make sure we go around. The other thing we need to keep an eye out for is we have our available runway, we have our touchdown zone, we have our approach course, which is a little funky, but it's not too bad. We also have the also incredible 126.45, so we can go ahead and check our weather before we get to our destination. Okay, let's go ahead and pop back over here. I'm going to start getting all my frequencies all ready to go. Why not, right? Let's do 126.45. It's not the longest flight today. I hate it when it does that. This is just a fun little trick. You can go ahead and flip this to the other mode so it doesn't make you nearly as crazy. So now when I do this 126.45, it'll actually not take a lifetime to do it. So much better. Obviously use the comm spacing that makes most sense to you. So now we can go ahead and check the weather when we get to Hartford VOR. Another really slick trick too is we could actually put this on the other channel too. So I can actually go boop like this, set my other comm to the weather, and actually listen to that on our way towards the target. This is just a great pro tip in general. Notice when I swap, I get no sound at all. The reason I don't get any sound here is because I haven't actually turned on the audio for that yet. If I come over here, it says listen to comm 2, and if I flick that on,
Private airport information, India 1800 Zulu. 100. Brainerd Airport information, India 1800 Zulu. 10. Brainerd Airport information, India 18.
all right, so we're able to determine exactly what the weather is at our destination without having to change off of that main frequency. Another highly recommended thing now too is if you can identify what your tower frequency is at that particular airport, I would definitely set that as your standby frequency in your COM 1 so that you can quickly change over to it once you get a little bit closer. Now, we've already done the math as far as what power settings we need and everything like that. So basically, once this number says about 118, I'm going to go ahead and start backing the throttle. Keep in mind this is airspeed, not ground speed. Some people get that very confused. Our ground speed is actually 109 right now. Okay, we're getting pretty darn close to our 118 here. Go ahead and lean the mixture out a teeny tiny bit more. Looks good. There's our 118. I'll start backing the throttle out a little bit. Remember, this is not a constant speed propeller, so as a result, when you start reducing that power, things start to get a little bit funky on you. I love the fact there's an indicator right here for airspeed. It's almost more useful than this RPM, because who knows how dirty your propeller is, right? Okay, that is all set, and we are in great shape. Looks like the visibility is actually starting to come down a little bit, which is kind of what I expected it to do. Keep in mind right now, we're still using VOR navigation. Again, we're still flying on instruments here. At any point, of course, we could flip back over to the GPS. And as you can see, our particular VOR technology here is not nearly as accurate as if we were trying to do this conventionally. You can actually, let me zoom out just a teeny tiny bit. You can see that this is my calculated position based on GPS. This is my actual position based on the VOR. Now, where this is going to get really weird is the farther along we go on this trip, the far less and less accurate the VR is going to be, because we're going to get to that point where we can't quite read the radio. All right, 121 is a little bit faster than I want it to be. I'm going to go ahead and reduce my power a little bit more. Again, this is a wonderful feature. In the real aircraft, you basically have to take this number, figure out how warm it is outside, and then work out your altitude, and then calculate what this number actually is. This does it instantaneously for you. Some people might argue that ground speed is an even better calculation because we know exactly how long it's going to take us to get to our next destination. All right, just studying everything real quickly. Good time to start thinking about our approach. Like we saw that just a minute ago, we're going to be going down to 2,500 feet. I might as well start pre-arming that now. We're going to have to be doing that very shortly. Let's say 2,500. That looks pretty good to me. Once we, of course, get a little bit closer, we'll begin our descent. I'll be doing a 500 feet per minute descent. 500 feet per minute in this aircraft roughly gets you at a point where you're going to be losing about 1,000 feet every 4 nautical miles. Now remember, we're supposed to be crossing Thumb at 2,500 feet. So we actually have to start thinking about descending pretty much already. Or at the very least, once we cross Thumb, we've got to get ourselves down to about 2,500 feet. Taking a look at my DME, which is my distance measuring equipment, I can see I'm about 13 nautical miles away. Remember, we estimated reading out on the original chart that this should be about 19 nautical miles when we hit Thumb. Now we'll see just how close my actual math was. Remember, that's back of the envelope math. That's not fancy pants math. In the real world, always double check your calculations. Make sure our mixture is good. We've already pre-armed our descent. We could actually, the moment we press this button, by the way, we're going to start our descent. So we want to make sure that we do that at the right possible time. All right, good time to double check to make sure everything makes sense. Is this aircraft working? We can actually turn on the brightness a little bit. Kind of helps. There we go. Now I can actually see what the heck I'm doing here. It's kind of a great day, but you get these kind of days in fall in this part of the world. Of course, in the real world, by the way, on days when it's this cold, you'd want to go ahead and take this handle and pull this one all the way out. And of course, when you're climbing, you want to push the handle back in, because when the engine gets that hot, it starts getting very, very uncomfortable inside the cabin as you get all that nice blast of hot air that comes through it. A question was asked a few days ago where they said, why do I have a flight path vector? I've got better than that. I actually got this great community mod, and I can push this button now. Oh, God. Isn't that the most wonderful button you've ever seen in your life? This is a really neat mod. You can get this on the Flight Simulator forum. Basically, type in G1000 Flight Simulator forum mod, and it'll give you this. Keep in mind, though, it will break some of your other aircraft if you're not careful. They're still working on it. Like if I go to engine, I should be able to shut all my engine instruments off, but I can't do that yet. And I also have a bunch of other things, like there's a chart feature down here. I have my OBS. It's pretty cool stuff. Eventually, we'll be able to suspend our navigation, which will be a wonderful thing for us once we get that capability. Okay, everybody ready for a descent?
2,500 feet.
Oh, getting a little bit of turbulence there. Oh. We just got asked to descend and maintain 2,500 feet, just like I said.
Expect RNAV runway to approach via Thumb transition. Cleared to Thumb red.
Isn't that awesome timing? Man, we're good at this. Man, we're good at this. You gotta admit, that's pretty impressive. So I'm actually gonna flip my CDI back to GPS mode. I'm gonna go back to nav mode. Remember, if you change your CDI, you shut off your nav mode. Here's a really, really fun trick. I'm going to go ahead and make sure that my airspeed remains about the same my entire descent here. You don't really want to be speeding up or slowing down because it's going to be affecting all your tight calculations. All right, we're just going to go ahead and descend. Now it's time to really start thinking about landing this aircraft. All right, interesting. Very interesting, actually. It's all right. We'll improvise.
6-4 contact, Bradley approach on 127.8.
Go ahead and swing to the side. We've just been assigned a new frequency.
Going to 127.8 red 64.
Okay, so now the GPS has decided on our own to go ahead and go pick that other destination, because remember, we're following the VOR this whole time. So I'm going to go ahead and dial this in anyway. We're going to be doing it via thumb, and we're going to go ahead and activate it. There we go. Of course, now it thinks we need to go back to thumb. We already did thumb, thank you. So we're just going to go ahead and double check our approach here. And you can see we have a user waypoint. We've already done that. Normally what you could do is you go to menu and you could delete your flight plan and kind of reset that and all that. Normally you'd be able to actually activate that particular leg. Now that's kind of a bummer that we can't do that particular part, but that's okay too, because we can just fly it by eye as well rather than relying on it. Again, this is a known bug within the system, but again, when you're a pilot, these kind of things can happen to you at any moment. We could of course turn the aircraft around, cross over thumb, and then go direct, but that's not going to do much for us. So I'll go back to flight plan. Normally what we do is we'd go to the next one, we press the direct button. You could actually type in what you wanted it to do, but in this case, like I said, we're just going to fly it as a modified approach anyway. I'm not too concerned with it. All right, so again, this is the importance of situational awareness. All right, so we're going to be hitting this point at 2,500 feet, then we're going to be making our heading 2 degrees. Notice we're getting the warning for altitude. Call Bradley approach.
Broadly approach red 64, 2,600 feet.
Red 64 Bradley approach. Continue to wait at this plan. Altimeter 29.902.
Excellent. Okay, we're in great shape. So now we're just going to proceed direct to WEGOT. Keep in mind your power was reduced for climb. We want to crank that back up and keep ourselves as close to the original speed we were traveling as possible. We have a really good look at the river there. I love the fact that this is now track up, which is wonderful. It's much more obvious where we need to be. We need to be roughly right in this zone right here as we start getting a little bit closer. Reduce my airspeed a little bit, make sure everything's set correctly. This is a little disorienting. Now, some people would say, couldn't you just go ahead and dial in the LDA? I mean, there's a lot of stuff we could do. We could also go ahead and set this up so that as soon as we cross that point, we could actually grab a new approach and actually come back around again. There's a lot of little things that we can do differently. But again, I'm trying to keep this relatively simple. And again, this kind of things happen all the time in the real world. You just kind of learn to kind of work with them. All right, you can see we are a little high, but that's perfectly fine. But again, when we cross WEGOT, we're going to have to be coming down. I'm going to go ahead and double check my approach plate one more time. I'm really not in the mood for any more surprises, as you could probably imagine. So we need to be 2,500. We need to be 2,200 feet. That's 6 nautical miles. That's a very slow descent. So we'll have to take advantage of that once we get a little bit closer. All right, back to our adventure here. Again, normally if you're flying instrument, you'd barely be able to see anything that you're working on, but this works actually fairly well for us. Looking pretty good. 2,500 feet. Our next altitude is going to be 2,200 feet, like I mentioned before. We'll just fly the approach basically manual. Looking pretty good. You can actually see where we're going to be landing. You can see how ridiculous of an angle we're at right now. Remember, we're going to be turning to 2 degrees. Now, one fun trick you can actually do is you can shut heading mode off, set it to 2 degrees. Remember, that's going to be the approach course. And then you could actually flip it on at the last second. It'll actually hold you level until you get a little bit closer there. This is just a fun little trick I've learned. All right, coming up on WEGOT in just a moment.
Contact Brainerd Tower on 119.6 when inbound on the approach.
Tower on 119.6 red 64.
So now what they've done is they've gone from the TrackOn controller, which controls the area, to giving us to the actual airport itself. The airport itself has already been warned that we're coming. So once we get a little bit closer, we'll go ahead and turn on to them, give them a call to say, hey, we're about to land this plane, just so you know. So now the aircraft is going to go ahead and take its right turn. Normally you could have this coupled to the GPS, but we'll fly as kind of non-precision. Now what you're going to want to do is call it Brainerd Tower. Remember, you'd have to have gone on ATIS first to check what the weather was.
Inbound RNAV runway to approach.
Red 64 Brainerd Tower. Cleared RNAV runway to approach. Altimeter 29.9 or tree 100 tree at 11.
All right, they've given us our instructions.
Cleared RNAV runway to approach. Red.
We're going to begin our descent. You can actually see right away the fact that we're just slightly high here. We can actually lower the aircraft. But the big thing is we're going fast more so than we are going high. Actually going to start reducing my speed a little bit. About 500 feet per minute. It'll be a pretty slow descent here. Remember, we need about 2,200 feet by the time we get to our next waypoint, which is Lomas. So we have quite a ways to go before we need to actually start worrying about that. All right, we've got this thing actually fairly well centered at this point. Probably going to have to bring it to the right a teeny tiny bit because I can see our arrows pointing just slightly off. So now you can see, according to this, we're actually fairly well lined up with the airport. Now, the last thing in the universe you'd want to do is mangle the approach button, because if you hit that button, you're going to get a bit of a surprise. So if we were, of course, a little bit luckier here and we didn't hit that point at the right spot, we would just be able to hit the approach point and literally let that GPS fly us to the ground. But again, it's important that you kind of think of these things. All right, we need to be at 2,200 feet when we cross Lomas. I'm looking right now. I can see I'm at 2,200 feet now, which simply means don't go less than 2,200 feet when you hit that point. My next place is going to be Dan's. You have to be 680 feet at Dan's. So I'm actually going to get everything all warmed up and ready to go here. So by the time we get a little bit closer, we can literally just press the vertical speed button again and then land this. Keep in mind, when you're first learning to do instrument flights, you'd be flying pretty much like this the whole time. It's kind of nice to actually be able to see roughly where we are. That wind, as they mentioned, is fairly strong, so we want to kind of keep that in the back of our head. For those of you who got horribly lost, you can actually ask them for the airport direction. Good time to double check to make sure altimeter makes sense. We confirmed that when we listened to the weather a minute ago. All right, I'm feeling like we're slightly too far off course. We're going to bring ourselves back to the right a little bit, and then we're going to swing back to the left. Notice it says that we're perfectly in glide slope, which is interesting because it's a flat glide slope. All right, looking pretty good. I think we're flying over, where are we right now? Straight down for a second. Hey, the island. All right, we need to start thinking about landing the plane, trying to get us back on course here. Again, like I said, we should have some more of that other functionality, but this is just a demonstration. That's all it is. I think it's important that you're skilled enough with any of these things that you can improvise. A little bit more to my left. I'm going to line us up quite nicely here. One more click to the left, and we are in great shape. All right, we're going to start our descent once we cross Lomas. Go ahead and zoom in just a teeny tiny bit here. Yeah, it's not perfect, but it's pretty darn close. Now we need a much, much more aggressive descent this time. Looking pretty good. Looking out the window, I can already see it, but again, we wouldn't normally see it. This is going to suddenly start going like this on us in a moment. You'll know it exactly when it happens. We're going to need about 500 feet per minute. Ready, set. There's the outer marker. Crossing Lomas now. 3, 4, 5. Okay, so now we can't go less than 680 feet by the time we get to our next waypoint. Again, this is just flying IFR. We're not doing anything crazy here. We're only using instruments as references. Obviously, you can look out the window and get a pretty good look at everything here and know exactly what you're doing. Oh man, look at how offset we are to that runway. Holy smokes. We actually need to come to the left a few degrees.
Red 6 is cleared to land runway 2.
Clear to land runway 2 for Red 4. And that's it. All we got to do now is land the plane and we're good to go. We're actually a little bit below glide slope. You can see very, very clearly. I'm actually going to lift the nose up a teeny tiny bit and try to recenter. It means we're descending too quickly. All right, looking pretty good. Nice and relaxing. Time to go ahead and get the landing light all fired up. We've already got everything else going pretty good. Stretch myself out. This is always fun during this part of the flight. Continue descending, and we need to come to my right just a teeny tiny bit. Check my wrap. Again, once we hit that point, we need to be at 680 feet. I feel like we're a little bit high, even though the glide slope marker here tells us that we're a little bit low. Yeah, we're definitely high. Don't forget, you still have to land the airplane. Common mistake. Yeah, I still feel like we're high. I'm going to go ahead and pull the throttle all the way. I'm going to go ahead and make sure my mixture is all set. Time to do our landing checklist. Gas, undercarriage, mixture, propeller, flaps, lights, speed. We're good to go. Bring on those notches of flaps. All All right, looking pretty good. Our approach speed in a Cessna 172 is about 65 knots. We're getting just a little low. Of course, we're getting a little slow too, so that definitely contributes. Go ahead and bring in our last couple notches of flaps. Bring ourselves to the right just a teeny tiny bit, I should say the left. Yeah, we're going right about 65 knots. It's going to be our approach speed. We've already been given permission to land. It's just a matter of landing. Now, since we're doing this IFR, we need to immediately start thinking about our missed approach procedure, which is of course, going to be taking us to 2,500 feet. But of course, if I start setting in 2,500 feet now, this aircraft would instantly level off, which is unfortunate because that means we won't be able to go around. Normally, of course, like I said, if you were in a GPS-coupled approach, this information you could go ahead and set during the approach, and we've seen that in previous videos. I actually have a whole video dedicated to RNAV approaches. All right, keep it right at 65 knots, and we're definitely on the low side, but we're not like really low. We're about to level off. Remember, our maximum minimums, if that can be a word, is going to be a total of, I believe it's 460 feet. So I'm looking out the window. We're just crossing that next waypoint now. We're actually a little late. I'm looking out the window. I can confirm visible sight on the runway. Automatic pilot is going to be disengaged. I'm going to go ahead and land the aircraft using conventional methods. Now, this is the great thing about any of these visual approaches, I should say IFR approaches. You can instantly switch over to a visual approach if you need to and still be legal. This, of course, like I said, would be a great time to make sure your missed approach stuff is all kind of set up if you haven't done it already. Again, it's 2,500 feet, so we climb to 400 feet, and then we're going to proceed direct to Hartford later. All right, 6,500, looking pretty good, looking pretty good. Again, if this were in the middle of the clouds, it wouldn't make any difference to me. The techniques are exactly the same no matter what your visibility is. Make sure your flaps are down, everything's good. Please do not touch the screens. Again, this is a great aircraft for learning these skills because it has everything you're going to need on it. A little bit high, but that's okay.
500.
I'm surprised I don't see anybody on their boat today. There's always people on that lake. All right, swing around nice and gently, lined up. Remember, we already got permission to land. If we need to go missed approach, which is fairly common, you just, of course, declare missed approach and just go. Oh, we got that crosswind. I can definitely feel that. It's not a terrible crosswind, but it's just enough to remind you that it's a crosswind. Of course, because of the clouds today, we got all the flashers going on the end of the runway, which is awesome. This is real weather, by the way, in case you're curious. A little bit fast, a little bit high. There we go. Basically, the way you land this plane, you're just going to point at the giant number 2. When there's runway underneath you, call the throttle. When the nose gets within 6 feet of the ground, level off, and as it starts to sink, pull back. Throttle at 0. You're going to get close. 6 feet over the ground, you're going to level the nose off. When it starts getting heavy, you pull the nose up just a teeny tiny bit, and wait for the thump. Delightful. Okay, so hopefully this video was helpful, and hopefully this series of navigation was helpful. You've seen me land at this airport multiple times now, so you know exactly all the different methods that you can use. Personally, I'm a big fan of the visual flight rules methods, you know, the traditional dead reckoning, just because it's so much work, and you know, it makes the flight that much better when you do it. IFR is wonderful because it translates to any size aircraft as long as you have the appropriate instrumentation. By the way, please shut your light off when you cross off of a runway. It's blinding to everybody, even during this time of day. But other than that, that should kind of solve it for navigation purposes. At some point, of course, we'll have to make a video explaining how the FMS on like the big Boeing 747 or the Airbus A320 works. But for now, I think this has been a pretty successful series. I would definitely encourage everybody to go ahead and pick a flight just like I did. Try each one of the different techniques individually in turn to see which one of them makes most sense for you and which one is going to be, you know, the easiest for you to use. But again, the more you practice, the easier it will be. Watch out for some of those avionics bugs. They can get a little annoying, as you probably noticed. But we did okay in the end, so I'm not complaining too much. Enjoy.